Hi. So today, I kind of wanted to explain kind of what cracking is and how people do it, and actually show you how people do it, because I feel like you don't really get to see what actually goes on behind the scenes, and you kind of just get to see you just kind of hear about it and then you use it. So I'm gonna show you basically. So what is cracking? Cracking is basically when you take a paid program, something that requires some sort of license or key, and you kind of remove that requirement and kind of just basically turn it into freeware. Um, Obviously with the caveat that it was never intended to be that way, but yeah. So let's look at the example here. So in this example, we have a calculator, and in our imagination, the calculator, you're supposed to pay for a license, and it checks the license, and you don't really need to understand the code. I'll explain the code in a second, because most of it doesn't matter. So it checks for a license here, and it checks if the license file is equal to ABC123. Now, obviously this is quite basic. In practice, it's a lot more complex than this. Typically, they're not gonna be checking it against a string inside the code. They're gonna be, uploading it to a server with encryption and making sure that you never get to see any of the keys that are real, not even, yeah. So here, that's basically all it does. It just reads the file, checks is license equal, and then here we have the add function. That's all we really need. It's just kind of a testing calculator. And then here we can see in the main program, it checks is the key real, and if it's not, then we don't get to run the calculator, and if it is, then the calculator loads, and we can use it. So I think I just built the file, so it doesn't really matter. So let's look at the random calculator program, and let's run it. So first off, we have the license key. Okay, so it's not quite equal to the key, so if we run it, it will say invalid key, because it said wait a second, ABC12 is not equal to ABC123. But if we make it ABC123 and then run it, it loads, and then we can do 5 and 6, and we can run 11, and then 9 and 3, and we made it. Okay, so the calculator is working as is, but let's pretend that maybe we kind of don't have a license. We haven't bought this calculator, but we still need to figure out how to add things, and that's how it kind of is for a lot of this stuff. So maybe hopefully you're not trying to do that. Maybe you're just trying to learn and have some academic experience when it comes to reverse engineering, but and cracking software. So yeah, reverse engineering is actually what you have to do here, and it goes through a process called patching, which is basically you remove every single check that it has. Now, we've done something called a force inline or an inline. And basically what this does is, while this looks like a function in the code, when it actually compiles, this function basically just gets copied into everything. So there isn't just one function that we can patch, and every time it checks for something, we have to do that individually. And that's a more common practice, because it adds another layer of at least annoyance to anybody who's trying to crack it, and oftentimes they'll miss a couple things. And that's why sometimes if you're using a cracked program, you click the wrong button and boom, everything crashes. And that's because that just had a random check that whoever cracked that program didn't actually look into and didn't realize there's a check there, and now while you can use most of it, that part still isn't unlocked because it still wasn't patched. But anyway, patching, I've mentioned that about 10 times already, and I haven't really explained it. And so patching is basically imagine you take the compiled program, the actual exe file, and you basically remove this, and you basically say it's impossible to get to the -1 from the ternary, and also this is just the same thing as this. What this does is it says if the check is true, if you have a license, it returns A plus B, and if it isn't, then it's -1. I guess maybe I could have written that a little bit nicer, but it does definitely make it a little harder to reverse, so it's a little more realistic. So let's actually look what does reverse engineering look like? Or you wouldn't even really call it reverse engineering, because I guess we know all the code, but how do you patch stuff? Okay, so we're going to take a tool called Binary Ninja. Now there's plenty of tools you can use to do this. This one costs money. Some of them do, some of them don't. Oftentimes you're usually going to be getting a better experience with one that's paid, but that's actually not always true. And yeah, so let's just enter the exe file here, and we're immediately met with a bunch of looks a little bit scary. So let's, first of all, we're able to take it to sudo-c, and what this does is it kind of generates like what it thinks might be the C code or what its best guess is, and obviously this in reality looks absolutely nothing really like what our code looks like, but we can obviously see some continuities here. So we can see like the ABC thing, we know that's the check because, you know, that's the only place where the ABC string is mentioned is here. And we can also see, luckily, that we have this if statement here, that if it doesn't work, then we get an invalid key, and then we see the return 1, and so we can, you know, immediately understand this is where that initial check is, and we can figure out how to get rid of it. So to get rid of it, hashing it is like very, very simple. So we have this, and we can see that it's a jump if not equal, and if it's not equal, obviously whatever these two, it jumps over here to where we can see the calculator is loaded, and if they're equal, it keeps going and returns. So we're gonna click this, and we're just gonna click always branch, and now you can see that our other code is basically just like, it's useless, that it will never run. It's not possible now to get that little like error message. And if we save that and if we run it, and let me just make sure our key is still broken. Yeah, we still have the ABC12 key. So if we run this, it'll now say calculator loaded. Oh my gosh, yeah, we cracked it. So let's run it. Let's do 5 and 6 again, but we got -1. Why do we get -1? Because in the code, it returns -1 if you somehow got to the add function, but the check isn't working. Now there could be, you know, a lot of time it won't ban you for this or whatever, because like they're not really sure. Like sometimes they think it could be a glitch, it could be a random call that shouldn't have been there, but whatever. All we know is that in our program we ran it and we got -1. So we know now, as the person who's bashing this program, well, there's something wrong here, because I know 5 and 6 isn't -1. So how do we fix that? Well, the first thing we'll do is go to sudo-c again, and now we're going to look for the add function, and we can see that we're calling it here, so we can just double click it, and we look at the add function, and we look and we look, and we see the key thing again, and we read it really, really detailed. We're locked in, we're tapped in, and we see, oh my gosh, look at this, the result that we're returning has the option of being -1. So, okay, how do we fix that? Well, we can see that we have the ternary operator here, and we can see that if something is false, I guess, if something is 0, then it clicks this, otherwise it returns what we need, and we can kind of tell that this is what we need. So let's, again, convert it back into basically just assembly, and okay, so this is a jump if equal, and it jumps here. This is what's returning our -1, and if we don't jump, then we get the right response. So we're gonna want this to never branch, and this is so easy, this is so simple. Like obviously, like real reversing is a lot more complex than this, especially because we know the source. But yeah, in its most simple form, we'll just click the never branch, and now we really only see this add, and we see the return and everything. So yeah, so let's save that and let's run it again, and if we still look at the license stock key, it's still ABC12. So we run this program, and we type in R5, and we type in R6, and we get 11, and we give any number, and we still get the sum of it. So yeah, there we go. So we've patched it, we broke our little paid calculator. I mean, like, nobody should be making a paid calculator, that's low-key crazy. But yeah, I mean, that's how you crack it. Okay, that word is so funny now. But yeah, I mean, that's the most basic form of cracking. That's basically like a very, 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 very simplistic way of what people who crack like real paid programs do. Now, obviously there's a lot of different things that paid programs do to make it harder. You know, the license itself is more complex, it has a lot more data than just the key. It's a lot more hidden, it's a lot harder to find where it's doing the checks, it's a lot harder to hash the checks. Sometimes it'll be completely obfuscated, so you'll have like a lot of stuff to sift through, and might not even be able to find a clear definition of this, and you know, might have to take some risks and stuff. But yeah, I mean, at its core, that's what cracking is. It's removing a bunch of checks that say like, hey, this license is it valid or no, like, yeah, and then getting rid of those. So yeah, that's kind of how all this works. In the end, like, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, I hope maybe like you learned something. Maybe you understand now how people write software and why you're able to use your Photoshop for free, even though you know that it costs quite a lot of money. Thank you.